You see Robert Downey Jr. in the Iron Man suit, glowing under a storm of applause. But few know that just years earlier, he was sitting in a cold jail cell, erased from Hollywood and labeled beyond saving. People say he was lucky, but no one is lucky at rock bottom. This is the story of a man who dragged himself out of the dark and rose one last time. In the fall of 1999, Robert Downey Jr. walked into a Los Angeles courtroom not as a movie star but as a man visibly collapsing from the inside out. His wrists were cuffed. His eyes were empty. Reporters whispered his name like it belonged to a ghost. And then he spoke a sentence so disturbing, so brutally honest, that the room fell silent. "It's like I have a shotgun in my mouth, and I like the taste of the metal." It wasn't a poetic cry for help. It was a man admitting he no longer feared his own destruction. This was the moment Hollywood stopped seeing him as troubled and started seeing him as doomed. A former Oscar-nominated genius now stood as a cautionary tale. The industry's living example of what happens when brilliance rots from within. Studios cut him loose. Contracts dissolved overnight. Friends distanced themselves, unable to watch him self-destruct any further. Even judges, tired of giving him second chances, began to wonder if the next headline would be his obituary. And yet, buried beneath addiction, humiliation, and the weight of a world waiting for him to fail, something flickered. Not hope, not yet, but a terrifying clarity. If he didn't change, he wouldn't survive. If he did change, he would have to crawl out of darkness no one else believed he could escape. This wasn't just rock bottom. This was the point where most people disappear forever. Long before the courtroom, before the mugshots, before the world labeled him beyond saving, Robert Downey Jr. was a quiet boy growing up in a house overflowing with art, chaos, and shadows. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was a groundbreaking filmmaker. A rebellious spirit with a brilliant mind and a dangerous relationship with addiction. His mother, Elsie, was an actress with a fragile heart and her own battles with instability. Their home was not destructive by intention. It was destructive by nature. Beautiful, creative, unpredictable, and dripping with the kind of darkness that seeps into a child before he knows what to call it. Robert's childhood was a world where nights blended into mornings, where parties lasted longer than memories, and where adults forgot that children were watching. And Robert watched everything. He watched genius flourish in one room and self-destruction in the next. He watched his father create films that broke rules, then break himself in the process. He watched his mother's talent glow like a flame, unsteady, brilliant, and painfully vulnerable. He didn't grow up in a war zone. He grew up in a storm. And in that storm, at just 6 years old, Robert was handed a joint by his father, not as an act of cruelty, but as a misguided expression of closeness. A way, Downey Sr. later admitted, of sharing a moment rather than teaching a lesson. Robert didn't understand the weight of it. He only understood approval. The door to addiction opened quietly, disguised as bonding, and the child stepped through without knowing he might never fully return. As he grew, the lines between childhood and adulthood dissolved. He followed his father onto film sets. He memorized scripts not meant for children. He absorbed the electricity of performance, the adrenaline of creativity, the high of being seen. And yet, behind the light, something darker followed him. A sense of instability, of impermanence, of a world where nothing stayed steady long enough to hold on to. By his teens, Robert was spiraling through a life that looked glamorous on the outside but hollowed him from within. He moved from New York to Los Angeles, then back again, chasing his parents' fractured lives. Each move carved a new crack inside him. He learned early that people you love can disappear even when they're standing right beside you. He learned that applause could feel like affection. And he learned that substances could quiet the chaos, even if only for a moment. But he also discovered something else, something that would both save him and nearly destroy him. He was extraordinary. While other kids played sports or argued about school, Robert stepped into characters with unsettling ease. He could mimic voices, embody emotions, transform himself in front of a camera like he was born for it. Directors didn't see a child. They saw a phenomenon, a prodigy, a star in formation. Yet no one asked whether the boy himself was ready to carry the weight of those expectations. No one noticed the cost of brilliance planted in unstable soil. What makes Robert's story so haunting is not that his downfall came out of nowhere. It's that it was set in motion long before the world ever heard his name. Before fame, before Iron Man, before the fall, there was a child trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense at all. A child learning patterns he would spend decades trying to break. A child already standing on the fault line that would one day crack open beneath him. This is where the darkness begins. Quietly, innocently, invisibly. Not as tragedy, but as inheritance. By the time Robert reached his late teens, acting was no longer a dream. It was oxygen. It was the only place where the noise in his life quieted, where he could step into someone else's skin and forget, even briefly, the fractures within his own. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing stillness. He dropped out of high school and moved to New York, living in cramped apartments, working odd jobs, and auditioning for anything that allowed him to step in front of a camera. Most actors at that age were trying to learn the craft. Robert already lived it. His childhood, chaotic, artistic, unstable, had become its own twisted training ground. He knew how to read people instantly, how to switch emotions like light switches, how to disappear into a character with unsettling precision. Directors didn't see a beginner. They saw raw talent sharpened by a lifetime of absorbing everything around him. When he joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1985, it should have been a breakthrough. A national stage. A comedic playground. A chance to show America what he could do. But behind the scenes, Robert was fighting battles no one else could see. He wasn't lost yet, not publicly. But the patterns planted in childhood were beginning to surface. Even as critics dismissed that SNL season, something more important was happening. Hollywood was starting to notice him. Soon came small roles in films like Weird Science and Tough Turf, followed by more dramatic turns that showcased his depth. But his performance in Less Than Zero, 1987, changed everything. He played a wealthy young addict sliding into self-destruction, a role that should have been a character study but instead felt disturbingly close to foreshadowing. Audiences were mesmerized. Critics praised him. Directors chased him. And yet, the industry whispered a quiet fear. He wasn't acting. He was reflecting. Robert later admitted that the role blurred the line between fiction and reality. He understood the character too well. He embodied the emptiness too naturally. The film didn't ignite his addictions, but it validated them, normalized them, threaded them even deeper into his identity. The applause he received didn't feel like success. It felt like permission. Still, his star continued to rise. Throughout the early 90s, Robert delivered performances that showcased versatility rarely seen in someone his age. He could be charming, wounded, comedic, tragic, sometimes all within the same scene. And beneath the darkness forming quietly in his personal life, his professional ascent was undeniable. Hollywood saw a future icon, a generational talent, a name destined for awards. But what the world didn't know was that every role, every set, every burst of praise carried a shadow with it. The higher he climbed, the more fragile he became. The applause was intoxicating, but nothing was strong enough to quiet the internal storms for long. Success wasn't healing him. It was accelerating the fall he didn't yet realize he was approaching. Robert wasn't chasing greatness. He was running from ghosts. And soon, those ghosts would catch him. Just as Hollywood crowned him one of its brightest rising stars. By the early 1990s, Robert Downey Jr. had become the kind of actor Hollywood couldn't ignore. There was something electric about him, a volatility that made every performance feel alive, unpredictable, and unforgettable. He didn't just play characters. He dissolved into them. Casting directors described him as dangerously talented, a compliment wrapped in unease. They knew he could deliver brilliance. They also sensed that brilliance came from a place that wasn't entirely stable. His breakthrough came in 1992 with Chaplin, a role that demanded precision, physical transformation, emotional depth, and an almost spiritual understanding of a man who himself lived between genius and vulnerability. Most actors would have studied Chaplin. Robert became him. He mimicked the gestures, mastered the comedic timing, captured the melancholy beneath the humor. The performance was so transcendent that even critics who doubted him were forced to acknowledge the truth. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just talented. He was exceptional. The Academy Award nomination that followed seemed like the beginning of a long, glittering future. Hollywood anointed him as one of its next greats. The studio system opened its arms. Directors fought for his attention. His face began appearing on magazine covers. He walked red carpets with the confidence of someone who finally belonged. Someone who had outrun the instability of his childhood. Or so everyone believed. Yet beneath the applause, something darker was brewing. Fame didn't soothe him. It fed the fractures he had carried since childhood. The more the world celebrated him, the more he feared he couldn't live up to the narrative being built around him. And so he reached for the one thing that quieted those fears, if only momentarily. Substances. The habits formed in childhood had become rituals, and the rituals were evolving into dependency. But in the public eye, the rise continued. Robert shifted effortlessly between genres, from romantic comedies like Only You to darker dramas such as Natural Born Killers. Every performance carried the same magnetism. Audiences loved him not because he was polished, but because he was raw. He didn't have the plastic shine of other leading men. He had edges, shadows, mystery. There was a moment in the mid-90s when it seemed like he could do anything. Every new script offered another mountain to conquer, another chance to prove that his talent wasn't accidental. And often, he delivered. Even when films faltered, critics praised him. It was as though Hollywood collectively agreed that Robert Downey Jr. was one of the few actors worth watching even when the movies themselves fell short. But success is strange. For some, it fills the emptiness. For others, it magnifies it. Robert belonged to the latter. With every accolade, the pressure intensified. With every achievement, the expectations grew. And with every new role, the demands on his already fragile emotional foundation deepened the cracks within him. Hollywood saw a rising star. What it didn't see was a man walking toward the edge of a cliff, carrying the weight of unresolved childhood wounds, addiction creeping quietly through his life, and a growing fear that the world loved a version of him he couldn't sustain. The golden era of his career was not a period of triumph. It was the calm before the inevitable collapse, the last bright chapter before everything unraveled. And soon, the darkness waiting in the wings would step into the spotlight, dragging him into one of the most infamous downfalls Hollywood had ever witnessed. By the mid-1990s, Robert Downey Jr. was a rising icon with the world at his feet. But fame has a way of hiding fractures, and his fractures had been forming for decades. The habits that began as a 6-year-old boy trying to bond with his father were now consuming the adult who never learned how to silence the noise inside him. The applause grew louder. His private unraveling grew louder still. The first public sign of collapse came in 1996. Police pulled him over for speeding, and what they found in his car made headlines within hours. Cocaine, heroin, and a pistol. The news spread across the industry like wildfire. This wasn't a young actor experimenting. This was someone in freefall. Hollywood couldn't look away, not because it was shocked, but because deep down, the industry suspected this moment was coming. What no one saw was the storm inside Robert's mind. Addiction, he later admitted, didn't feel like self-destruction. It felt like escape, the only kind of silence he knew how to reach. And the more he used, the further he drifted from the version of himself the world expected him to be. After the first arrest came another, and then another. Each time, the details grew darker, more concerning, more heartbreaking. There were nights he didn't remember, days he didn't survive sober, hours spent drifting in and out of a world he no longer felt connected to. He missed court-ordered drug tests, violated probation. Judges who once offered compassion started delivering consequences. Then came the moment that shocked even him. In 1996, only weeks after his first arrest, Robert wandered into a neighbor's home. Not with violence, not with intent, but in a drug-induced haze. He curled up in a child's empty bed, unaware of where he was or how he got there. It was a surreal, tragic image. One of Hollywood's brightest young stars, lost in someone else's house, asleep in a space that symbolized innocence he'd never truly known. The incident was splashed across every paper. Reporters made it punchline material. But to Robert, it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. It was proof he was losing control. Still, the downward spiral continued. The years that followed were a series of mugshots, courtrooms, broken promises, and cycles of rehab that never lasted. Friends tried to help. Studios hesitated. Insurers refused to cover him. On set, he was brilliant when he showed up. Off set, he was vanishing into himself. Hollywood no longer saw him as a risk. It saw him as a liability. In 1999, after repeated violations, a judge delivered a sentence that forced the world to confront just how far Robert had fallen. He was given months in a state prison. Not rehab. Not another chance. Prison. And it was there, behind walls that erased fame, status, and identity, that Robert faced himself with brutal clarity. No cameras. No scripts. No characters to hide behind. Just silence, cold concrete, and the kind of loneliness that strips everything away. He later described addiction as having a loaded gun in his mouth. Not because he wanted to die, but because he was no longer afraid of what might happen to him. That numbness was the most dangerous part. The world assumed prison would destroy him. It didn't. What destroyed him came after. When he was finally released, Robert tried to rebuild. But Hollywood had already closed its doors. Producers didn't trust him. Studios refused to hire him. Even when he was cast, there was always a condition. Random drug tests, insurance clauses, financial penalties, close monitoring. He was treated not as a leading man, but as a risk calculator's nightmare. The final collapse came in 2001. After yet another missed drug test, a simple requirement he couldn't fulfill, Robert found himself back in front of a judge who had no leniency left. The sentence was clear: rehabilitation center, then prison if he failed again. And that's when something inside him broke, not from pain, but from realization. He understood that he had become a spectator in his own destruction. That every court appearance, every mugshot, every headline was not just a symptom of addiction, but a reflection of the boy he once was. The one trying to make sense of a chaotic world with no guidance, no stability, no solid ground to stand on. He had run out of chances, out of excuses, out of time. Rock bottom wasn't a moment. It was an era. The world had moved on without him. Hollywood had already identified its next generation of stars. His peers were winning awards, leading franchises, building legacies. Robert, once the promise of the 1990s, was now its cautionary tale. And yet, in a quiet corner of his fractured life, something small shifted. Not hope, that would come later. Not redemption, that was still years away. But clarity. A voice inside him that he hadn't heard since childhood whispered the truth. No one is coming to save you. If you want your life back, you must rebuild it from the ashes. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this silent, private reckoning, was the first step toward the comeback Hollywood would one day call a miracle. Rock bottom didn't save Robert Downey Jr., it exposed him. It stripped away the illusions he had carried for decades, the belief that talent alone could outrun pain, that charm could substitute for healing, that the world would wait for him to get better. When everything was gone, when no one expected anything from him anymore, Robert was left alone with the one thing he had spent his life avoiding: himself. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no triumphant speech, no cinematic breakthrough, no moment of sudden enlightenment. It began quietly, in a small rehabilitation facility where days were predictable and walls were plain. For the first time in years, he woke up without the fog of intoxication. And for the first time ever, he saw his life clearly enough to understand the truth. If he continued the way he was going, he wouldn't simply lose his career, he would lose himself entirely. He later described this shift as a flicker, not a transformation. A flicker of willingness, a flicker of responsibility, a flicker of belief that perhaps he wasn't condemned to remain the person the headlines portrayed. Recovery wasn't a miracle for him. It was labor. Mundane, exhausting, uncomfortable. He faced cravings. He faced shame. He faced the emotional wounds he had inherited long before he knew how to name them. And every time he wanted to quit, he reminded himself, no one is coming to save you. Slowly, painfully, he began piecing together the structure he had never had as a child. Routine, discipline, stillness. He exercised. He meditated. He worked jobs far below the status he once had, not because he was humbled, but because he was rebuilding from zero, from silence, from sobriety. Then came the moment that would quietly change the trajectory of his life. His close friend Mel Gibson, one of the few people who still believed in him, offered him a small role, a chance so fragile that it could vanish with a single misstep. It wasn't fame returning. It was opportunity whispering. Robert took it. And this time, he didn't run. He held on. He stayed clean. He showed up. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was the doorway to it. By the early 2000s, Robert Downey Jr. had become a quiet presence. Sober, disciplined, rebuilding his life one restrained, careful step at a time. He was no longer a headline, no longer a scandal, no longer a rising star or a fallen icon. He was simply a man trying to earn back the trust he had spent years breaking. Hollywood, however, didn't forget easily. Studios still saw him as a financial risk, a liability they couldn't insure, a reminder of what unchecked brilliance could become. But redemption rarely arrives in grand gestures. Sometimes it appears in the form of one person willing to take a gamble. That person was Jon Favreau. When Marvel Studios began searching for an actor to lead their bold new experiment, a cinematic universe built around a character the general public barely knew, Favreau saw something others didn't. He saw Tony Stark in Robert. Not the superhero, not the billionaire playboy, but the man underneath. Flawed, brilliant, haunted, self-destructive, yet capable of extraordinary change. Marvel executives resisted. Insurance companies refused. Industry insiders called the idea reckless. But Favreau insisted. He argued that Robert didn't just understand Tony Stark. He was the embodiment of what Tony represented. A man who had destroyed himself and then found the courage to rebuild. Robert arrived at the audition with the weight of his past still trailing behind him. But for the first time in years, the weight didn't crush him. It grounded him. It gave him depth that couldn't be faked, humor shaped by pain, charisma tempered by humility. What Marvel saw that day wasn't risk. It was truth. The decision changed Hollywood. When Iron Man premiered in 2008, audiences didn't just fall in love with the character. They believed him. They recognized the shadows behind the jokes, the vulnerability behind the bravado, the rebirth behind the armor. Robert wasn't performing a role. He was revealing a life rebuilt from the inside out. And suddenly, the man whom Hollywood once dismissed as unsalvageable became the anchor of the highest-grossing franchise in film history. He became the emotional core of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Its tone, its heart, its humanity. He wasn't just Iron Man. He defined what Iron Man meant. But the true comeback wasn't the fame that followed. It was the quiet victories. Staying sober, showing up, choosing responsibility over chaos, building a family, proving that redemption isn't a moment. It's a commitment renewed every day. Robert Downey Jr.'s legacy is not that he became a superhero. It's that he became a man stronger than the darkness that once controlled him. Robert Downey Jr.'s journey is not a miracle story. It isn't a tale of luck, destiny, or some cosmic twist that saved him at the last second. It is the story of a man who walked into darkness with his eyes open, who lost everything that once defined him, and who discovered, painfully, slowly, that the only way out was through the truth he spent years avoiding. He didn't rise because the world gave him another chance. He rose because he finally chose to take one. His life reminds us that rock bottom is not the end. It's the mirror. The place where you see yourself without distortion, without excuses, without the stories you tell to soften reality. It's the moment you understand that healing is not dramatic. It's deliberate. It's discipline. It's choosing again and again to become someone your past no longer controls. Robert's redemption is not about Hollywood or fame or a red and gold suit. It's about the quiet courage it takes to rebuild a life when no one is watching. It's about the strength found not in perfection, but in persistence. And so the final question is not about him. It's about us. If he could rise from a place the world believed he would never escape, then what story are we still capable of rewriting?